So here we are. After reviewing the Star Beast in one of my previous videos, I am now back to take a look at the second of the Doctor Who 60th anniversary specials. Wild Blue Yonder, which was one of the more mysterious episodes due to how little we knew about it. The only thing we did know is that the episode itself would be reminiscent of Ridley Scott's Alien and John Carpenter's The Thing. But is this episode as good as the Star Beast? Well, there's only one way to find out. So after my expectations were met with the Star Beast, I was intrigued to see what came next with Wild Blue Yonder, but unlike the previous episode, I went into this one completely blind, not knowing what to expect, as I'm sure was the case for most of the fandom. But I'm happy to say that Wild Blue Yonder was pretty good. Not only is it a brilliant continuation of the story for the Doctor and Donna, but it's also a brilliant standalone episode on its own as well. So unlike the previous episode, there isn't too much for me to say regarding the cast, as there's only two major actors in the story, these being David Tennant and Catherine Tate. But what I can very easily say is that they went above and beyond in the story especially, because not only do both actors have to play the Doctor and Donna, but they also have to play the villains of the story known as the Not Things, which I'll get to in a moment. But I seriously cannot commend both David and Catherine enough for their performances in this episode, because having to play two characters at the same time is a tricky thing to pull off, and I've got to give more kudos to Tennant, especially for the scene where he faces the fact that he was responsible for the flux. It's an example of David's looking back at modern Who's canon, which I really admire. Some of it was down to the writing, but a lot of the credit should still go to the acting in this episode as well. So let's talk about the Not Things in this episode. For a one-off villain, I've got to say, these guys were incredible. We've had shapeshifters before in Doctor Who with the Zygons, but in my opinion, Wild Blue Yonder shows what the Zygons could accomplish, because the mystery of who's real and who's the imposter is tricky to follow, and leads to some great moments in the story. Also, the mystery of the Not Things as villains reminds me a lot of the Midnight Entity, where you don't see what it really looks like, and you're supposed to be scared of them because they could quite literally turn into anyone. Like the Doctor says in the episode, if the ship got back into the known galaxies, then the Not Things could wreak havoc on billions of galaxies, and that's what makes them terrifying. Another thing I did love was the use of some prosthetic work in the story. As mentioned in my review for the Star Beast, we could have quite easily had the Not Things shape-shifting with CGI being used, but the fact they couldn't get it quite right and we see the prosthetic arms and legs used was a nice touch, and shows the extra mile that RTD was willing to go. So the story for Wild Blue Yonder itself was brilliant. Whilst I didn't mind the opening scene with Isaac Newton and the Doctor accidentally inventing gravity, it does feel a little unnecessary, and this episode should have begun with the TARDIS crash landing onto the abandoned spaceship. But that was one of my only major complaints with the episode, because everything else is still fairly solid. The only things I would tweak are the technical things behind the scenes. All I would have done is touch up the CGI and not include the opening scene with Isaac Newton. Again, it was a pretty funny scene, but I feel it didn't mesh well with the tone of the episode. Everything else in the story was brilliant, from the TARDIS disappearing to the Not Things reveal, and especially where the Doctor just breaks down over the flux and the part he played in not being able to prevent it. Also, kudos to Ross T. for not ignoring the whole timeless child thing, because anyone else would have quite easily ignored it, but I admire the fact he was willing to acknowledge it. But the one thing I had to talk about is the ending of this episode with Wilf returning. Honestly, it was one of my favourite scenes in the episode. Just seeing the excitement on Wilf's face when the Doctor appears from inside the TARDIS was just the most heartwarming thing ever. It does suck that this was the only scene that Bernard Cribbins was able to film before his passing, but I think it's a perfect send-off to the character and a nice ending to Cribbins' career that spanned several decades. In terms of setups for the future of the show, outside of teasing what will happen in the Giggle, there isn't much that this episode sets up for the show in the future, which I think is a good thing, because I feel this episode was written to be more of a standalone story, which I think was a really good thing. If Davies hadn't written the episode, then somebody else would have tried to crowbar in the appearance of a past Doctor or companion, but I still enjoy the episode despite not having that. But to summarise my thoughts, Wild Blue Yonder was brilliant and I absolutely enjoyed it. The inspiration taken from Alien and The Thing is very clear, and I really admire RTD for taking a lot of risks with the story. And that concludes the second part of my trilogy of 60th reviews. Be sure to stay tuned for the final part where I discuss the third and final chapter, The Giggle. In the meantime, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel for further videos, and be sure to stick around for future videos like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.